am recording now. So welcome to our closing celebration for the exhibition 100 Years, 100 Women, where we are honored to have 4 of our artists joining us. We started out planning the show more than a year ago to coincide with the centennial of the ratification of the 19th Amendment of the Constitution, which granted most women in the United States the right to vote. And we have noted all throughout, and just need to say again that, of course, not all women were granted the right to vote at the time. Chinese Americans were not allowed to be citizens of the United States because of the Exclusion Act of 1888. And Native Americans were not considered citizens until 1924. And although they were legally allowed to vote, African American women and men were often excluded from the polls. So there was a lot of work that still had to be done in the intervening 100 years. And as we all also know, there is a lot of work left to do to work towards equality in our country. But we should still celebrate the hard work that has been done by many people and all of the amazing women who inspire us every day. And I'm so pleased and touched that we had so many artists respond positively to our invitation. And if you walk into the Clay Studio Gallery, you are surrounded by women who have inspired artists across North America and even some in England. And it's really pretty exciting. So for those of you who can still get in and see the show, you have until Sunday. And for those of you who have experienced it online, you will get to see it forever. Knock on wood. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Stephanie Osser. Hi, Stephanie. Carol Epp, Hannah Pierce, and Alex Stadler, who are joining us. And for lack of a better order, we're going to go in alphabetical as I have done before. So I will share a biography of each artist, and then we'll share some images with you all. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We'll get a chance at the end to open back up. So I'll just ask everyone besides the speaker to put themselves on mute. And here we go. Carol Epp is a Canadian ceramic artist living and working in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Her ceramics branch off into 2 distinct bodies of work, wherein she produces lines of sculptural and functional objects. Her work has been exhibited throughout Canada, in Australia, Scotland, and the US. Carol was born in 1978 and studied ceramics and art history at the University of Regina with Ruth Chambers, Jack Shores, and Rory McDonald, receiving her BA in 2001. She later attended Grant McEwen College in Edmonton, Alberta, before her studies at the Australian National University in Canberra, where she received her Master's of Arts in 2005. She's currently based in Saskatoon, so it's earlier there. Thank you for joining us early. Epp has taught ceramics through classes and workshops in Saskatchewan, Alberta, Australia, has worked for several galleries and arts organizations, including Saskatchewan Craft Council, AKA Gallery, Rosemont Art Gallery. She's been involved with arts organizations, including the University of Regina Ceramic Students Society and Saskatoon's Potters Guild. Epp has participated in art residencies in Medicine Hat, Alberta, and Honolulu, Hawaii. Epp creates both functional and sculptural ceramic work that explore themes of consumer culture, morality, war, poverty, and environmental degradation. Recent works include a series of figurines that subvert familiar kitschy childhood imagery with scenes of devastation and terror. Epp explains, I want to both entice and repel, and inspire a desire to consume alongside an awareness of the consequences of that consumption. I think it's also really important to note that Carol is a big advocate for other artists. She has a great blog and Instagram called Musing About Mud, wherein she is very generous with highlighting the people she sees around her who are talented, and the special focus on Canadian ceramics, but really I've seen her talk a lot about even those of us here in the US, and I want to welcome her to our talk today.
Thank you so much. That's a lot to follow this early in the morning. I feel like you stretched back into some stuff way back when and whatnot too. I'm just going to jump in and mention too, you've mentioned musing about mud, and over the years that's had a bit of an international focus, but one project that I do work on as well is make and do ceramics, and that one is very specifically Canadian focused, and we're building a database of Canadian ceramic artists so that we sort of have this recording of this time in history, and it's super accessible for people to research what's happening in Canada, and just find new artists to follow and whose work you could enjoy too.
That's a great stuff. So do you want to start by telling us about the 2 plays for the show, and then we can sort of look through some other examples of your other work?
Absolutely. So the 2 women that I chose, this was really a challenging project to take on because there's so many stories and so many incredible women that could have been focused on. And in the end, I decided to choose 2 women who have had a huge impact on my life very personally. So the piece that you're seeing right now is a piece about a lovely friend of mine named Diane. And both of the 2 women I look to as mentors, life coaches, maternal figures, I guess, in a lot of ways. And Diane, her family and our family have become incredibly entwined over the last few years. We've known each other for over 8 years, and she's to me a very incredible symbol of resilience and nurturing, and just, I don't want to tell too much of her story, but she is a grandmother who has taken in, currently she has 5 of her grandchildren. And at different points, she's actually had a lot of cousins as well. And then just the idea of extended family, she's had other kids in who are, children of all kinds. I mean, she calls me a sister, I call her my grandma. It's that type of a family approach to things. So over the years, we've gotten to know each other and have also had this incredible experience of fighting together for a lot of the rights for these kids, and for her, fighting against sort of some of the systems and government systems and social service systems that are in place in Canada, that have sort of kept her locked into a system of poverty, and just without sort of reiterating her story or her trauma and whatnot, it's just been an incredibly eye-opening experience for me that also has become really relevant to the work that I do. All the work that I do is talking about politics and social situations. And this was just a really lived experience for me as a person of privilege and as a white person to delve into seeing some of those systems that we really sort of feel protect people in the world and how they don't. So our bond sort of transcends friendship and familiar sorts of things, but also into an incredible education for me and for my life going forward. So I really wanted to honor her in this piece because of that, and the gift that she's given me of opening my eyes in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, that's lovely and powerful, and the piece just really does exude love, I think.
Thanks. This piece is about a dear friend of mine named Monique. It's Monique Bloom. She's a performance artist, and she lives on a property about not quite an hour north of where we live here in Saskatoon. And Monique and I have known each other for probably about 12 years, I guess now. And Monique is one of the most sort of charismatic people that you will come across. If you wanted to define somebody who sort of just exudes life and energy, positive energy, she is absolutely that. She's one of those people that anybody gets around, and she sort of has like a smile that hugs you she's that type of person. But she's also incredibly, she's again very resilient and has really, they moved out of the city and moved to this farmland, this acreage that they've got, and she's done a lot of incredible performance artwork dealing with women's rights and just the women's roles in domestic and farm life and survival. And just Saskatchewan's, I mean, we're prairie province, but there's also some fairly harsh environments and harsh history of when women came to this province, when settlers came to the province, and the harsh realities that they had to face. And she goes into a lot of that with her work as well, and in really beautiful and powerful ways. But she's also just been very much a guide for me in terms of parenting as well as art career. She's just one of those people that I bounce pretty much everything off of. So she's an incredible mentor in my life and somebody that I really look up to. So I wanted to honor her within this piece as well. And over the years, I've done a lot of work, sculptural based, about motherhood and about my own sorts of develop, me having kids and how I've dealt with that and how it's changed my art practice and whatnot. And this imagery of the arms as branches or roots has come up quite a bit in the work that I've done over the years. And it's that sense of being grounded and growing, but also sort of reaching out, but also being sort of locked into certain things. And so it sort of made sense to bring that in with her as well, in this imagery of how tied she is to the land, but then also how outwardly she looks all the time. And I actually, when I showed her this piece, she went and she dug back probably about 20 years into her old practice, and she had all these drawings, and in the drawings were all of these women with branches for arms, and we both just sort of had this moment of like, oh my God. So it was just this really crazy sort of little combination that came out of the piece, which was really lovely.
That's so interesting when that synergy kind of happens.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for telling us about the women. And I something I love about this show is that there are very, very personal relations like you've presented. And then there are, those sort of famous celebrity types that people also just, have that. We can have our own personal, intimate, in our own mind relationship with those people, but it's just nice to see that there was a combination of that response. And then like mothers as well, but the fact that you've chosen family is really special. Thank you for that. I've pulled a few more images, and I just was hoping that you could talk a little bit in general, maybe about your technique or anything, any other things you wanted to point to from your own practice.
Sure thing. So a lot of these dishes that sort of, I guess, I'm known for right now, they came about after I had kids, and I actually had this desire to just start making dishes for my own children so that they were using handmade work. And before this time, I was making very formal based work with, chino glazes or porcelain, and it was focused on form. And so it was this massive shift in the aesthetic of my work. But I found that it was this thing that brought joy. So when I was having sales and stuff, or you would be able to see that people would smile when they saw the work. And I thought that alone, as an artist, the ability to just shift somebody's emotion that simply and that quickly to a smile or to something familiar that makes them happy, is actually quite powerful. And it's something that I try to do all the time with different things, like for good and for bad, for thinking. Like the next piece that you're going to show is a piece that it's a bit darker of a piece, but again, it's just about quickly and effectively shifting sort of emotions or perspectives on different things. So over time, the work has become a little bit more political and sort of pulling in more narratives from the sculptural work that I do, but there's still like a lot of cats and fun stuff and whatnot as well. And some of those also have underlying themes though, right? So things that, some of them, like this piece, are obviously very challenging, but other ones too, sometimes it might be just about representation within our culture and having queer representation or BIPOC representation through objects within the craft sphere, and the importance of that. But this piece is this is a portrait of one of my sons. And this was a really challenging piece to do, but it was at a time when he sort of had one of those crises of sort of loss of innocence. We had this sort of moment within our family, and he just sort of realized the scope of human condition and human nature, and how vile that can be sometimes. And it was pretty shattering to see him go through that, but also really beautiful to see the compassion that came out of that. So this piece sort of honors that moment in his life. In terms of technique, though, I hand build half of my work, and then I throw pieces as well. These pieces you're seeing right now are thrown. And I use a cone 6 clay body, and I use Amico underglazes, but I work with Mishima, so I'll sketch on the dry forms before they're bisque fired. I'll sketch just with the pencil and draw different things that I want to put on there, and then I coat everything with a really thin layer of wax, and then I carve through that wax with a sewing needle, and that gets me those really, really thin lines. And then I put the black underglaze through that, wipe it back, kiln fires, the wax burns off, and then I'm left with all of those black lines, and then I add the color post bisque firing, and then everything just gets a clear glaze after that and gets fired. And that's like hours and hours of work summed up in about 20 seconds, but yeah.
Yeah, it's very intensive, and it's all, your hand, and you can just see that kind of loving effort that you put into each piece, and how much time goes into each one. So that's really beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing those things with us, Carol.
Thank you. It was a great opportunity. I appreciate it.
Thanks. So as our alphabet goes on, we'll move on to Stephanie Osser. And first I will share with you her bio. Stephanie Osser was born on Long Island, New York, to musical and artistic parents who encouraged her art and singing. She became a book editorial illustrator and an illustrator in porcelain, stoneware, and polystyrene. She began her career while in graduate school for ceramics at the University of Montana, working for the anthropology and wildlife departments illustrating research papers. The New England Aquarium Boston hired her as their staff illustrator for exhibits. Then there were collaborations with art directors and designers for nonfiction children's books, textbooks, and adult trade books with major publishers. Cookbooks by famous chefs, gardening books, editorial food illustrations for the New York Times and the Boston Globe built her illustration portfolio. With her specialty in food still life and step-by-step instructional illustration showing hands making food recipes, she was hired to illustrate puppets and crafts. This included a fun stint working with artists and craftspeople who created those charming Muppet characters. That's so cool. Osser then brought her two-dimensional illustrations to 3D ceramics, working in porcelain and stoneware, reusing many of her copyrighted book illustrations. Architectural ceramics and glaze, transferware, decals, and lithophanes became her ceramic specialties. For Babson, Olin, and Wellesley College students, she managed their ceramic studio and gave workshops. Awarded a grant, she and the students made ceramic murals celebrating green energy and sustainability on their campuses. More knowledge and inspiration was obtained at ceramic residencies, Goliaard, Denmark, Kecskemét, Hungary, and Medalta, Canada. Watershed in Maine, ceramics program office at Harvard. Her ceramics have been included in a long list of juried ceramic exhibitions, and she has worked permanent collections at the Statue of Liberty, Ellis Island, the International Museum of Dinnerware, the Blair Museum of Lithophanes, Red Star Line Museum in Belgium, and the Needham Historical Society. Commissions teaching her techniques and workshops with children and adults give her joy. Music and singing and a classical chorale and a swing band. Her other passionate pursuits inspire her work. Thank you for being with us, Stephanie.
Well, thank you for inviting me. And I'm just so impressed with all the artists that you've included in their various plate shapes, other than the circle, which I thought I had to do. But I want to say that I think you've taken up my 7 minutes with that long narrative, so I don't think I have time. But I'm hoping to introduce you to the puppeteer behind my first piece that you have on screen, Suzanne Pemsler. I don't know if she's there to say hi. Suzanne, are you there? I don't know. Well, anyway, she is somebody I met years ago with my children. We love puppets, and there's a great organization in Boston, a puppet guild, and a place where they perform. And she was my art director through this thing, and I was so thrilled to have her help, because I didn't want to embarrass her. I wanted to highlight and celebrate her career in the arts. So her long career you can read about in her bio on your website. but it was fun making it. And the slides, because there are so many artists watching, I thought you would like to know the problems I had with cracking. And I always make bas-relief molds of my work, because the plaster mold is sort of my best friend. And I know I can redo it and it doesn't come out. But the clay bodies I used, great clay bodies for everything else I've done, just were cracking. I should start with my favorite porcelain and cone 6 and ended up with stoneware. So one piece made it to the show. The other piece we're seeing online here. And you can, yeah, anyway, the image on the left is a watercolor I did of Suzanne's puppet called Adele from one of her operas. And she made all of these characters, and I was so charmed by them. And the performing arts matters. They matter now, and it's such a hard time for them, all of them. But before we go on, I also wanted to say that I chose performing artists because I have this background in music. And, you know, they're all performing now on Zoom. But my mother was a beautiful singer and played the piano, and she had an antiques business, and I learned a lot from that. I think all those objects that were around our house or that she sold were so beautiful, and I examined them carefully, and I think that my work was influenced by them. And my dad played the violin, and he also had a beautiful voice, and he made art from steel. And she encouraged me, my singing and my art. And my husband is a beautiful pianist, and he plays for us here. And my daughter is an opera singer, a mezzo-soprano. And my son decided to take a different route, and in fact is a very talented chef out on the West Coast. And I'm so proud of him too. And he just went the other way, though. He used to perform in Gilbert and Sullivan operettas, and he played the French horn but hated it. So that's my family. And so I guess you can go on to the images, and I'll try to say whatever's left to say. This artist, and my newest friend, is Shirley Hunt. And she plays a gorgeous viola da gamba, which is the instrument on the left, and a cello. And she's played in my choir orchestra, and she has played on antique instruments at the Museum of Fine Arts here in Boston. And she has a fabulous career. And you have a little something to play of her, so she can be represented too. And her mother is watching.
It's all about the mothers. Okay, here we go. Oh, wait, I have to stop. Hold on. I have to stop the share and switch. Hold on. Sorry, everybody. One day I'm going to figure out how to make that seamless, but I haven't done it yet. Lovely.
Thank you.
Go back to this. So, I mean, the cello is just
Yeah.
for hours.
Yeah, and it's tough to play on Zoom, and that's what all the performing artists are doing now. It's really hard. All the choirs, everybody, nobody's singing, nobody's doing anything, only home stuff. But anyway, you can see from the, do you see that nice crack on the cello, the viola da gamba on the left? That's what kept happening to my piece.
Oh.
That's why I was so grateful
Here.
that I bothered to make my plaster molds. And if you look at the image on the right and the plaster mold, I make a bas relief, and I cast it that way. And I've started making lithophanes, so I learned that if you make if you do the carving on your plaster, you kind of make an Audi, a bas relief, a very shallow one. On the left, you see she's playing the cello.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very shallow. And when you take a look at the piece, if you could go back to that for a second, the cello on the right is recessed. It's a technique called émaux en bronze, or émail en bronze, a French 1800s technique I learned from Margaret Carney, who wrote a book about lithophanes. And you'll see how, and she helped me, inspired me to get into that with my background as an illustrator.
So it's so great to see the process pictures. Thank you for sharing those with us. And I know you're, you had your troubles with cracks, but you kept at it. So I'm happy that one's in the gallery now. And this helps people understand the lithophane and the process of it a little bit.
Right. And so with lithophanes, you're carving an Audi, on the plaster directly. That's the way I learned from Helena Rubenstein at Keshkemet, in Keshkemet, the International Ceramic Studio there. So from Margaret Carney to Keshkemet, I started making these lithophanes from a children's book I illustrated. So I'm always using my own imagery, and so you're casting very, very thin translucent porcelain. I have slips that I've used, and I've had thin clay bodies that I've used. And, I've made some night lights. I'm teaching some workshops in this, and it's a joy to make. It's a bit of a process. Everybody and anybody can do it. It's very easy if you like to do this kind of thing. And you can buy the nightlight brackets from the porcelain gardens out in California. And so you just make them to fit and voila.
Great. I love it. I love your turtles. And I think we have two more. So these are women related.
Yes, this again is that technique of émaux embrun or émal embrun that I learned from Margaret Carney in lithophanes. And basically you have an innie image rather than an outie. And the glaze, I'm guessing they used lead glazes at that time. I used celadons from Amico and just I tickled it a little bit with underglaze to emphasize the detail first. And then I put the celadons over. And so you can see, and I was celebrating the Boston Women's March, and I call these girls on the march because I was so impressed with the little girls who were supported by their parents wearing their pink hats and so on. So now you can do the last one, then you can go on to the next person. And this is a show that's on right now with that fellow who called in and was complimenting my efforts, Jamal Eversley, who was a student of mine when I taught and ran a studio at Babson for Wellesley and Olin colleges as well. And he just kept coming in and he just loved the painting part of ceramics. And because of COVID, we were supposed to work together in my studio and have him paint the image on the right, which is in the raw terracotta clay. But because of COVID, he had to go home and to his studio, and he used what we call warm temperature glaze or cold finish or whatever you want. He used acrylic to paint the image, and he really did a nice job. And a friend of his made the glasses with a 3D printer. And if you had a close-up of the Martin Luther King photo, Jamal painted significant little things all over it, but he's very, very talented fellow. And his show is online. And in fact, they're doing a dinner time presentation tonight at 6:30. So you're all invited.
Thank you. Okay, that's great. You're going to be Zooming all day.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me. I just love the challenge. It was great. And the important celebration of women and the performing arts. Yay.
Thanks, Stephanie. That was great. We really appreciate that you, you know, kept at it and always appreciate your enthusiasm and your positivity. So thank you for that. Okay, we're going to go on to Hannah. Hannah Pierce is a ceramic sculptor and mixed media artist residing in North County, San Diego. She received her MFA in ceramics from Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania and her BA in studio art at Humboldt State in California. Before graduate school, Hannah worked as an educator for people with developmental disabilities at Canvas Plus Clay Studio, located in Eureka, California. She's exhibited her work in exhibitions such as the Clay Studio National and the Workhouse Clay International, where she received the award Best of Show. She's also exhibited work in Thailand, as well as internationally recognized art fairs such as Aqua Arts Miami and Superfine Arts Fair. In 2017, she was awarded a full Kiln God Scholarship as a resident artist at Watershed Center for Ceramic Arts, and in 2018 was awarded the Abilities Fellowship as a resident artist at Baltimore Clayworks. Works from her solo show at Baltimore Clayworks were published in the June, July, August issue of Ceramics Monthly and also promoted in Be More Art magazine. Welcome, Hannah.
Hi, thank you for having me. Yeah, coming to you from California. It's a little early here. I actually just lived in Philadelphia recently, and then COVID hit. And it felt so weird to be in like an apartment in Philadelphia. I think it's been like so hard to live on the East Coast, like live in New York, live in Philadelphia. So I decided to like pack up my car and move back to California where I have family. And it was a good move. And it's been really nice to see family and friends from a social distance, but still be able to feel like I have a life. And I'm at home right now, but I wanted to talk to you from my studio, but my studio is kind of busy, which I really like, but there's like an escape room downstairs and like people playing music all the time, and then construction next door, they're building a theater. So yeah, great music and stuff. But anyway, so this plate is about India Moore, and they're this amazing actor who's used their platform to do a lot of humanitarian work and to talk about being transgender and non-binary. And I think they're so iconic and just crucial at this time. Amazing that they were able to be on like mainstream TV, and we don't see enough of that. But I think like they are just so, have just had such an impact on a lot of people. But a lot of my work, I talk about how I like to reflect on how everyone is trying to fit into a mold, whether you're aware of it or not, and whether that's gender roles or, you know, what your family wants you to be or what your job or your wants you to be or greater society. I think, you know, you're either aware of it or not. So yeah, you could go to the next slide.
I just wanted to say I was really moved by both of your plates, and India Moore so striking, and I had just finished watching Pose when I opened it up and was like, oh my gosh, this is, yeah. So that was exciting.
I painted it when I realized that, you know, the only person to be like nominated for, God, I'm so bad. What's the TV awards?
Emmys?
Yeah, Emmys. Yeah. I always mix them up. But found out that like none of the transgender actors on that show were nominated, and it was just, I mean, he's an awesome actor, but you know, the only person nominated was like a cis person in a show that's all about being transgender. So I was like kind of shocked by that, and I think a lot of people were. So yeah, I felt like I made the plate at the right time. Yeah. And usually I don't care to, like, I've never painted an actor before, but they're just so cool. They're just, they don't fit the mold of like a normal actor. Like they don't, you know, if you look at their Instagram and stuff, they just post like just being like a normal person and like, yeah, just, I don't know. They're just different, a different kind of celebrity. I usually don't like celebrities. But yeah, so this next play is about my grandma Anne, and it's, I don't have that many like pictures of her like that young, so I just kind of made it up and like, you know, used my face or whatever a little bit. But it's about how, like, a story I remember when I was little, her telling me that at school, this boy would like dip her braids in ink, her little like pigtail braids. And then I think it was either like the second time he did it or maybe a few more times, she just like whipped her braids back at him and like slapped him in the face with it. So he just had ink on his face the rest of the day. But I love that story so much because she wasn't like a well-behaved girl. Like, I think a lot of my grandmas were kind of like that, like kind of like unconventional. And it says a lot because it's like, you know, I've always felt like, you know, I've gotten to live like a, you know, crazy art life. And like, I live like in times now where I get to be a different, I don't feel like I necessarily have to fit this like women role per se, and like I know that they felt that they did, so it just means a lot more to me to have like all these crazy stories about like, you know, getting divorced when no one got divorced, and yeah, just wild stories like that. But I actually found out after making this that who I was painting was my grandma's mom. So it was like my great grandma. And like that was a story from her. I just mixed up the story. So I was talking to her about it recently and she like corrected me. But the funny thing is that her mom was also named Anne, like on her birth certificate though, but she never went by that name. So it was just like a weird coincidence that worked out.
Oh yeah, you don't have to use the title. There you go.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. I love that it also gave you a chance to talk to your grandmother about the story and sort of, that's so important to keep the stories alive and to record them.
Yeah. And I think for, you could go to next slides if you want to, but I think like, most of my work, there's kind of like a mystery about it. And there's a lot of personal stories in it, and like a lot of stories or stories I've heard from friends or people I know, or like strangers that I've talked to, like all those stories will kind of come back, and maybe I'll mix stories and stuff like that. So like, but usually I'm kind of like mysterious about all of it. I like to like kind of keep it that way. So sometimes it's like hard to talk about. But yeah. Oh, that, yeah.
Go back. You tell me.
Oh, no, you don't have to make it go back. I was thinking about that first piece, Bad Luck Baltimore. I did a residency at Baltimore Clay Works and like absolutely loved it and like loved the people there and stuff. But I was having like the worst luck ever. And I just made this piece about it. I like I got I got robbed twice living there, pretty quickly after living there, and like it's not like that. I was just like at the wrong place at the wrong time, but like there is a high crime rate there. And then I was like evicted out of my apartment, and so many things are happening at once within like this year of living there that so that's what that piece is about. Just to give you an example of like what I make work about.
Yeah.
But I like to play with 2D and 3D. And usually like the 2D element is like a figure or a face. And then I'll have like these 3D sculpted elements around it. And I like to keep it very surreal. It's always very surreal. But the play between 2D and 3D is like it's about these figures that don't like belong in their environments. Like they're never gonna fit in that environment. I like that contrast. And
so many of your works have, I'm just gonna do this quick so people can see and then go back, but you often do kind of in the round, like there's a surprise on the other side.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about this one a little?
I think that's like in the beginning what really like drove the work for me, or like why I wanted to do ceramics at all, was because I could do a painting and then complete the narrative on the other side. And it's always interesting to me like how people display the work, like what side is showing, like what's important to them. That's always like been really interesting to me. I've played with like mirrors and stuff too. So like when you're looking at the mirror, you get even more of like a warped perspective of it.
Is that the inside of a kiln?
Oh, it's like a little living room, but I use like crackle. So like up close, it's actually like a drawer and like sheets flowing down.
Oh, got it. Okay.
It does look like a kiln.
It has that.
Because the kilns get like all the crackly walls. Yeah.
You open the kiln and you're like, what's in there now? Right, Stephanie, you have to always check to see if there's a crack something in the kiln. I think I can't get out of my head this artist friend he said the kiln will break your heart.
Yeah.
Why I guess I was thinking about that, like broken heart looking in the kiln, what's happening in there.
Yeah.
That's great. Do you have any final words to leave us with, Hannah?
I think that's it. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for
Thank
having me.
you. Yeah, thank you. I've been watching your work since the grad show you were in at the Clay Studio. Was that like 3 or 4 years ago?
Yeah, yeah. I remember that piece.
Yeah, Raymond said something about it in the chat. So thank you. And we are going to move on to Alex now.
Hello.
Hi, Alex. I'm going to do your bio. Alex Stadler is a multidisciplinary artist, author, textile designer, illustrator, and curator. Stadler has written and illustrated more than 10 published books for children and adults, most of which deal with themes of emotional intelligence. We have a lot of illustration going on in this talk. Stadler has created public artwork and murals for Colette Paris, Reading Terminal Market, and Comcast in Philadelphia, and Saks Fifth Avenue in New York. As an illustrator, textile designer, he's created his own line of knitted scarves and blankets, Stadler Con, and has collaborated with and designed for Comme des Garçons, Jack Lenore Larson, Gap Kids, Todd Oldham, and Whoopi Goldberg. In Philadelphia, Stadler has curated shows at the Art Alliance, the Clay Studio, and the Independent Seaport Museum. In April of 2019, Stadler had a one-person show of oil paintings, textiles, and ceramics at the Clay Studio. Such a nice place. He currently shows his porcelain and stoneware pieces in galleries in Milan, Provincetown, Philadelphia, and Los Angeles. Since 2012, he's been a featured artist at annual live customization drawing events in Japan, as well as Miami and Milan. In 2011, Stadler created PPOD, Philadelphia Produces Original Designs. That was a pop-up store at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. 1 year later, he opened Stadler Con in Rittenhouse Square neighborhood, which was a hybrid gallery design shop. And for 6 years, he produced exhibits of works by mid-career and emerging Philadelphia artists and designers alongside his own textiles and 19th and 20th century decorative arts. Through 2022, Stadler will be creating his own work and directing a team of artists to construct a memorial for 10 Philadelphians who died in the early days of the AIDS crisis and whose remains remain unclaimed. This work, conceived by Stadler, will be part of a larger initiative led by the William Way Community Center, and the project is funded by a grant from the Pew Center for Arts and Heritage. Bravo. I have 2 of his images here and then a few more in another platform, which I will open in a moment. But first, I would ask Alex to just talk about his inspiration to make these 2 plates for the exhibition.
So this was such a treat to do. I've really been thinking since I was a kid about what it does. I used to love my t-shirts if they had a good image on them, a bunny rabbit or something that really made me happy. But I was also kind of in a relationship with the picture once it was on a utilitarian thing, like a cup or a t-shirt. This is a coffee cup that I make, which has a face on it. But it's, in a way, the point of this cup is that you have a little friend with you there in the morning, looking back at you at that time when you're trying to pull yourself together, or maybe in the afternoon when you're just having a little piece of cake or something. So I turned over in my head a long list of women who've kind of shaped my brain. And the 2 came up sort of again and again were Mrs. Vreeland and Alberta Hunter, both of whom in my 20s especially were kind of, whose lives and work were kind of pointing the way for me to be and figure out how to be a person, how to be an artist. Alberta Hunter's album, Amtrak Blues, which she recorded well into her 80s, was just kind of on heavy rotation on my CD player. And really taught me that you could be intelligent and funny and mischievous all in one. And that within the discipline of being an entertainer or even a comedian, you could be speaking about things that were very serious and real, and maybe in an even deeper way if you could do them with a twinkle in your eye. And Mrs. Vreeland was really from reading her autobiography, DV, which I highly recommend to anybody, that I learned that as long as you were passionate about something, it didn't really matter what the lens was through which you were looking at the world. If you felt it deeply, you would be able to do something extraordinary. So in the case of Mrs. Vreeland, it was clothing, which fascinated me. Fashion has always fascinated me. But what I learned from her was that fashion could be your window to everything, sexuality, history, sociology. And I began to really trust my impulse to look at clothing and to love clothing because of her. Strangely, once I picked these two women, I realized that although the details of their lives were dissimilar, Alberta Hunter is born 1895 into a not impoverished, but working class and struggling family. And she starts to sing at the age of 8 because it's a way to make money to support her family. She starts singing on the street and then in theaters in order really to bring cash home. Deanna Vreeland's born 1903 into a very aristocratic, privileged New York society family. But interestingly, they both were grown women, either a 17-year-old teenager, or in Alberta Hunter's case, a 20-something-year-old woman, before the moment in their lives came when they had the right to vote. But also interestingly, they both had tremendous second acts or even third acts in their 70s and 80s. Alberta Hunter retired from performing after a really successful career and became a nurse from the 1950s to the 1980s. And only after being asked back onto the stage did she return in the 80s, and then had this extraordinary career traveling the world, performing live, hit albums. And Mrs. Vreeland, of course, after being very unceremoniously fired from Vogue, became in her 70s the director of the Costume Institute of the Met, and essentially invented what we now understand as a costume institute and a fashion exhibition. And they were both, I mean, truly on fire professionally and creatively in the later parts of their lives. And then I also realized that they were probably in the same nightclubs in Paris in the 20s and 30s, which was an extraordinary moment in Paris when people of all different classes and backgrounds and colors were all mixing up in that world, romantically, professionally, socially, and they were both really on that scene. So strangely, there was a lot of connection between the two of them. I was lucky enough also to find quotes from them. Words and pictures, and mixing words and pictures is very important to me, so I wanted them to be able to speak on their plates. Alberta Hunter's quote is, "I've been more places by accident than most people have been on purpose." And Mrs. Vreeland's quote is one which has fascinated me for a long time. She was asked whether the clothing she was showing in Vogue was clothing that most people would want to wear. And Vreeland looked, I hope, deadpan at the reporter and said, "Most people is not something that one thinks about." Because Vreeland understood that it was her job to make people dream. Vreeland really believed at Vogue that it was her job to show a window to somebody who was coming from a very plain life in the middle of the United States, that Vogue magazine could be a window on the world. And she took that responsibility very seriously. Anyway, so that most people, it was beautiful that I could find two quotes utilizing that idea of most people.
Do you want to tell us about your process a bit before we go on to your other images?
Sure. I work in white stoneware, and Dominique Ellis at the Clay Studio helped me when I first started working in clay, which was at an invitation from the Clay Studio to create a menorah. I wanted very much to be able to work in flow blue. I love flow blue ceramics of all kinds. And also I'm very interested in African and Japanese indigo work, and flow blue on white stoneware carries a lot of the same vibrations as indigo work. So especially if you can make it flow and drip. My mom was a watercolor painter, and she worked wet on wet. and I was always fascinated to watch the colors move on the page. And Dominique was my Sherpa in the whole process, and helped me develop a way to use cobalt in a way that it would run and bleed and have a life of its own. So I use that technique on both of these plates. It also, I have a kind of a squidgy, wonky line when I draw. And so the flow blue line means that the mark I make in clay looks like my illustrated work with pen. This is a picture of my mom. Sometimes drawing pictures can help me to understand somebody. Figuring out how to make a cartoon of my mom's face certainly helped me to understand my mother. But this is a particular illustration of the way my mother's fears and mind worked that taught me a lot about my mother. The next images, I think, are pencil drawings. This is Colette, done from a photograph. The next is Jamaica Kincaid, two authors whose work has really, again, both brought me a lot of delight and a lot of information. And there's a third one, a third pencil drawing. That's Helena Rubenstein, from whom I really learned how to collect without prejudice. When you see the extraordinary interiors that she assembled using lucite furniture and West African masks and surrealist paintings, it's the adventurousness and the lack of fear in the way that she built her art collection after she had made majillions of dollars as a cosmetic entrepreneur is really extraordinary.
Majillion.
Then, so anyway, but those pencil drawings were where I kind of learned how you make a cartoon of a face, and that while you're making a cartoon of a face, you have to really pay attention to it, because in a few strokes, you have to express it. You have to really watch the placement in the shape of the face, of the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and get the proportions correct when you're kind of winnowing something down to a few lines. That bowl is a bowl I made when Carrie Fisher died. I have just had such a deep love for her, and I was so busted up about what an extraordinary person she'd been, what a brilliant clown, and what a tough road she'd had while she did it. So that was just another moment of trying to commemorate the life, particularly the life of a woman. And that drawing later went on to be on a bowl, because I wanted people to be able to kind of eat their cereal or drink their soup with Carrie Fisher in the morning. That's Mrs. Reeland's face that I was working from, trying to get some of that joy and that insane, like, knife blade chic, and that tremendous willfulness to be beautiful. Vreeland grew up being told she was ugly repeatedly by her mother. She had a very beautiful mother and a very traditionally beautiful little sister. And her mother told her over and over and over and over again that the reason she was such a nasty child was because she was so ugly and so jealous. And Vreeland made a very conscious decision, not only to be beautiful, but to be extraordinary. So that's that picture. And then the shot of Alberta Hunter is from the cover of that album. I'm sorry, that picture, it's like she's right there with you and you've just said something she finds amusing. Anyway, that's Alberta Hunter from the cover of her album, which I highly recommend, Amtrak Blues. So great.
Let's look at these other ones. What is this one? Oh,
that was a kind of a first introduction to the idea of what do you do with an image on a plate? That was a commission for Takashimaya. They were doing artist plates to raise money for children's charities. So it was an attempt to make a plate that would be like a little bit of a game or something fun, so that when the kid was eating, the kid could play.
Oh, great.
That's what that was. And there's Carrie Fisher on a bowl.
And there's the friendly coffee mugs.
Yes, or anxious face, who knows what they are, but they're there with you.
They're what you need them to be.
Exactly.
Oh, what a lovely just walk through the images in your mind. Alex, do you want to leave us with anything else? That was lovely, but I want to get there.
I thought so much about my grandmother, Marjorie, who was born in 1910, while I was doing this, because my grandmother was really filled with rage. She was a very nasty woman. And I often think that if my grandmother had been able to unleash her ambition and her intelligence professionally, if she'd been the kind of high-level administrator for a department store, or the owner of a business, or the director of an advertising firm, like she should have been, if those worlds had seemed open to her and not so terrifying, that in many ways she would have been a much happier person. That a lot of her, I kind of have understood her backwards through what wasn't available to her, to what happens to a mind or a spirit that is crushed. So I was thinking a lot about her trouble while I was doing this show. So it was beneficial in some ways to go through this whole process and think about that generation in particular of women that saw the world turn upside down in terms of what was available for them. Anyway, that's all.
Well, that's a lot. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thanks to everyone. I would love to, I know we're over our time, but if anyone has a question or wants to add another comment, please feel free to just take yourself off of mute, and then I can look back through our chat. It looks like we have just a lot of nice comments from people saying what great work this is. Oh, and Raymond put in the link for if you want to nominate someone for us to include in our Wikipedia. We continue to work on getting artists, women, more women represented on Wikipedia. Raymond says, Carol's style is very approachable, welcoming, even if the subject matter is heavy. Lauren said that she smiles when she sees them. Thank you. Elisa asked if the Clay Studio is open for regular hours, and yes, it is. Our regular hours are in place, and the restrictions are please wear a mask. Not please, you must wear a mask, and we have lots of hand sanitizer, and there are only 6 people allowed in the gallery at once. Raymond asks Stephanie, do you press slabs of clay into your plaster molds? Plates are difficult for any ceramic artist because their surfaces are so exposed to the air and drying can be very tricky, leading to cracks. An aspect of the show that I didn't think about until now, the skill of so many plate makers in one room. Yes, indeed. Stephanie, is that what you do? Do you press the clay in, or are you using slip? Oh, you're on mute.
All right, there, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I did both. First, I started ideally with slip because I had a 2-part mold made very carefully, perfectly made. And then I started with some lovely, lovely porcelain clay that has great body and so on. And finally, stoneware clay, which succeeded.
Got it.
Yeah.
And Jamal entered the link to your event tonight. Thank you. Somehow he did that while he was driving. He's very talented. Hannah, we loved your piece in the Clay Studio National a few years back. It was a guy in a baby carriage, ? Yes, I think that's true. You remember that one, Hannah? Yeah. And Alex's show was in 2019. Was that only last year? Wow. And Alex designed the Clay Studios t-shirt, and Raymond put a link to that in there. Stephanie says thanks to Raymond. And Kelby says, Alexander, this is a lot in the best possible way. Moving and beautiful, thank you. Incredible work by all, says LaShonda Cooks. Enjoyed the backstories. And Stacy D says, the idea of plates and cups that keep you company is so appealing. I agree. As usual, we laughed, we cried, we felt togetherness this afternoon. Thank you all. If you are interested in supporting the Clay Studio, please consider becoming a member or going right onto our website and making a donation. We are happy to provide these free programs every week. I love getting together with all of you. Next week, we'll have Lisa Naples, who is an alumni of our resident artist program. She is having a solo show that opens next Friday, so she'll be our guest on Lunch and Learn. And the following week, George Rodriguez, who also has a show opening next week. And we have lots of thank yous and great programs. And that's all. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
for
you so
joining.
much.
Thanks to the artists. We appreciate you.